My sister accused me of poisoning her at our father's funeral. Her meal delivery app history proved something worse. My sister Lauren collapsed during our father's eulogy and pointed at me with a shaking hand while paramedics loaded her onto a stretcher. She screamed that I'd poisoned her coffee that morning, that I'd been trying to kill her for weeks, that I wanted Dad's inheritance all to myself. 80 people in the funeral home chapel went silent and stared as Lauren convulsed and vomited into a basin the paramedics provided. Her fiancé Derek rushed to her side, while my Aunt Judith grabbed my arm and demanded to know what I'd done. I stood frozen at the podium where I'd been delivering Dad's eulogy, the printed pages shaking in my hands, unable to process what was happening. Lauren and I had made the coffee together that morning in Dad's kitchen. We'd used the same pot, the same cups, the same cream from the same carton. I'd watched her pour her own coffee and add 2 sugars exactly as she always did. If the coffee had been poisoned, I would be sick too. But I felt fine while Lauren was being rushed to the hospital with what the paramedics said looked like severe poisoning. Detective Raymond Foster approached me while the funeral home staff tried to calm the crowd and asked me to come to the station for questioning. I said I wanted my lawyer present. Foster's expression hardened, and he told me not to leave town. The funeral ended in chaos. Guests left quickly while whispering and staring. My wife Anna grabbed our 2 kids and got them into the car before anyone could question them. Anna had been sitting in the front row with me when Lauren collapsed. She'd seen me at the podium the entire time, had seen Lauren drinking coffee that morning from the same pot we'd all shared. Anna told me in the car that something was very wrong with this situation because Lauren's accusation made no sense. I asked Anna what she meant. She reminded me that Lauren had been complaining about feeling sick for the past 3 weeks, ever since Dad had been diagnosed with stage 4 pancreatic cancer. Lauren had been posting on social media about mysterious stomach issues, unexplained nausea, and feeling weak. At the time, we'd all attributed it to stress about Dad's condition. But now, Lauren was saying I'd been poisoning her for weeks, which meant she'd been building a narrative before this public accusation. Anna asked if Lauren had any reason to want me blamed for something. I thought about Dad's will and felt my stomach drop. Dad had divided his estate equally between Lauren and me in his original will written 15 years ago. But 6 months ago, after Lauren's 3rd failed business venture that Dad had funded, he'd revised the will to give me controlling interest in his commercial real estate company, while Lauren received cash and property worth the same monetary value, but no business control. Lauren had been furious when Dad told us about the change. She'd argued that she deserved the company because she'd been working in real estate for years, while I was just a high school math teacher with no business experience. Dad had said that was exactly why I was getting the company, because Lauren had proven she couldn't manage money or make sound business decisions. He'd said I could hire professional management while Lauren would just run the company into the ground within 2 years. Lauren had left Dad's house that day, saying she'd make him regret the decision. 3 weeks later, Dad collapsed from what doctors initially thought was a severe stomach virus. By the time they diagnosed the cancer, it had already metastasized throughout his body. He died 6 weeks after diagnosis, never changing the will again. I called my attorney Benjamin Cross from the car and explained Lauren's accusation. Benjamin listened carefully, then told me to come to his office immediately before talking to police. He said if Lauren was accusing me of attempted murder, especially poisoning, I needed to prepare for serious legal trouble, even if the accusation was false. At his office, Benjamin laid out the situation clearly. Lauren's accusation, made in front of 80 witnesses at an emotionally charged funeral, would be investigated thoroughly. If toxicology reports showed poison in Lauren's system, I'd be arrested regardless of my innocence. We needed to build a defense immediately. I told Benjamin about the will and Lauren's anger over losing control of Dad's company. Benjamin asked if I'd had any contact with poisons or toxic substances. I said no. I taught algebra and geometry. I didn't even keep pesticides in my garage. Benjamin asked about Lauren's fiancé, Derek. I knew Derek had proposed to Lauren 6 months ago, right around the time Dad changed his will. Derek worked in pharmaceutical sales and had access to medications and potentially toxic substances. Benjamin made notes and said we needed to investigate Derek's background and financial situation. He asked if I'd noticed anything strange about Lauren's behavior in the past few weeks. I thought back to family dinners at Dad's house during his illness. Lauren had been there frequently, helping with Dad's care, cooking meals, managing his medications. She'd seemed devoted and helpful, but she'd also been documenting everything on social media. Photos of herself looking exhausted while caring for Dad, posts about how hard it was to watch a parent suffer, mentions of her own mysterious health issues that seemed to coincide with her caretaking duties. The social media presence had seemed like normal grief processing at the time. Now it looked like she'd been building a public narrative. Benjamin hired a private investigator named Susan Okonkwo to look into Lauren and Derek's recent activities. He also requested Lauren's medical records through legal channels and asked me to document everything I could remember about the past 6 weeks. I spent that evening writing down every interaction with Lauren, every family dinner, every conversation about Dad's will and his company. Anna helped me remember details I'd forgotten. She reminded me that Lauren had insisted on making coffee every morning during the final week of Dad's life, when we'd been taking shifts at his house. Lauren had said it was her way of contributing and helping everyone stay alert during the difficult time. But Anna had noticed that Lauren always made sure to serve everyone their coffee personally, handing each person a specific cup. At the time, it had seemed thoughtful. Now it seemed potentially sinister. Detective Foster called my cell phone at 9:30 that evening and asked me to come in for an interview the next morning. I told him my attorney would contact him to schedule something appropriate. Foster said the toxicology results from Lauren's hospital admission showed elevated levels of arsenic in her blood, consistent with chronic poisoning over several weeks. He said this was now a criminal investigation and I needed to cooperate fully. I gave the phone to Benjamin, who told Foster we'd be at the station at 10 a.m. with full legal representation. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about arsenic poisoning and where someone would even obtain arsenic. Old rat poison contained arsenic but had been banned for decades. Some industrial applications used arsenic compounds. Certain medications contained trace amounts, but who had access to quantities large enough to poison someone over weeks? Derek worked in pharmaceutical sales, but that didn't necessarily mean he had access to arsenic. I pulled out my laptop and started researching. Arsenic poisoning symptoms included nausea, vomiting, abdominal pain, numbness in extremities, and skin changes. Lauren had been complaining about all of those symptoms for 3 weeks, posting about them regularly on social media, but she'd never gone to the hospital or seen a doctor until today when she collapsed at the funeral. That seemed strange. If someone was genuinely being poisoned and feeling that sick, they'd seek medical treatment. Unless they wanted the symptoms documented publicly, but didn't want doctors to discover the actual poisoning until a specific moment. The funeral was the perfect moment. Maximum witnesses, maximum emotional impact, maximum suspicion directed at me. I texted Benjamin my theory. He responded immediately saying we'd discuss it in the morning. Anna came into my office and asked what I was thinking. I told her I believed Lauren had been poisoning herself deliberately to frame me and had chosen the funeral as the perfect moment to make a public accusation. Anna asked why Lauren would hurt herself that severely. I said insurance money plus inheritance motivation could be powerful enough. The interview at the police station lasted 4 hours. Detective Foster was joined by his partner, Detective Angela Ruiz, and they took turns asking about my relationship with Lauren, my knowledge of poisons, my whereabouts over the past 3 weeks, and my financial situation. I answered everything truthfully, with Benjamin sitting beside me monitoring every question. When Foster asked if I stood to benefit from Lauren's death, Benjamin objected to the phrasing. I explained calmly that Dad's will divided his estate between us equally in monetary value, that I received the real estate company and Lauren received cash and properties worth the same amount. If Lauren died, her share would go to her fiancé Derek as her designated beneficiary. I wouldn't inherit anything additional. Foster pulled out a document and slid it across the table. It was a life insurance policy for $2 million with me listed as the policyholder and Lauren as the insured. The beneficiary was listed as me. I'd never seen the document before in my life. Benjamin grabbed the policy and examined it closely. He asked Foster where this document came from. Foster said it had been provided by Lauren's attorney along with her formal complaint against me. The policy was dated 5 weeks ago and appeared to have my signature on the application. I told Foster it was a forgery. I'd never taken out life insurance on Lauren. That would be insane. Why would I insure my sister's life? Foster said financial motive. If I'd been poisoning Lauren, planning to kill her, a $2 million insurance payout would be strong motivation. Benjamin asked for time to examine the document with a forensic handwriting expert. Foster said that was fine, but I should consider the evidence mounting against me. They had Lauren's testimony about me making coffee that morning. They had toxicology results showing arsenic poisoning. They had a life insurance policy with my forged signature. And they had multiple witnesses who'd heard Lauren's public accusation at the funeral. Benjamin asked if they'd investigated where the arsenic came from or how it was administered. Ruiz said they were pursuing multiple leads, including my home, my school, and any storage facilities or secondary properties I owned. Benjamin asked if they were investigating Lauren's fiancé, Derek. Foster said Derek wasn't a suspect. He'd been devastated by Lauren's collapse and had provided a statement supporting her accusation against me. We left the station with Foster's warning not to leave the area. Benjamin said we needed to move fast because the evidence was being manufactured to frame me, and we had limited time to prove it before formal charges were filed. Susan Okonkwo called Benjamin that afternoon with preliminary findings. She'd been investigating Derek's background and found several concerning details. Derek had been fired from his previous pharmaceutical sales job 18 months ago for inventory discrepancies. The company suspected he'd been stealing medication samples but couldn't prove it. Derek had massive credit card debt totaling over $80,000 and had recently been denied for a consolidation loan. His car was 3 months behind on payments. He was facing financial ruin. Susan also discovered that Derek had been researching arsenic poisoning online extensively over the past 6 weeks. His search history included how to obtain arsenic, symptoms of arsenic poisoning, how long arsenic stays in the bloodstream, and whether arsenic poisoning could be detected in autopsy. The search history had been sloppy and easily traceable, almost as if Derek hadn't cared about covering his tracks or had wanted someone to find it eventually. Susan said something felt wrong about the whole pattern. The evidence against me was almost too convenient, while the evidence implicating Derek was too obvious. Benjamin asked what she meant. Susan said experienced criminals usually try harder to hide their involvement. Derek's digital trail was blatant. The forged insurance policy was crude. The whole conspiracy seemed amateurish. She suggested there might be a third party involved. Someone smarter who was directing the operation, while Derek and Lauren acted as the visible conspirators. Benjamin asked who that third party could be. Susan said she was looking into Lauren's attorney, a man named Victor Russo who specialized in estate disputes and personal injury cases. Russo had a reputation for aggressive tactics and had been sued twice for evidence tampering in previous cases. Both suits had been settled quietly. Susan thought Russo might have helped Lauren devise the entire scheme. I asked Benjamin if an attorney would really help a client commit fraud and attempted murder framing. Benjamin said some attorneys crossed ethical lines for money, and Russo's track record suggested he might be one of them. If Russo stood to receive a large contingency fee from winning an estate dispute, he might be willing to help manufacture evidence. Benjamin requested Lauren's phone records and asked Susan to investigate Russo's financial situation and recent communications. Meanwhile, forensic analysis of the insurance policy confirmed my signature had been forged. The signature was close but showed inconsistencies in pen pressure and letter formation that indicated someone had traced my signature from another document. Benjamin filed a fraud report with the insurance company and requested they investigate how the policy had been issued. The insurance company assigned an investigator named Thomas Bradford, who said similar fraudulent policies had been flagged in recent months, all originating from a specific broker who'd since disappeared. Bradford said the broker had likely been working with multiple parties to create false insurance policies for various schemes. He'd provide whatever assistance he could to our investigation. Anna called me that evening upset because she'd received calls from 3 different reporters asking about the poisoning accusation. News of Lauren's collapse and accusation had spread through our small community. Parents at our kids' school were asking Anna if I was dangerous. The school principal had suggested I take a leave of absence until the situation was resolved. Our kids were being bullied and asked if their dad was trying to kill their aunt. I called Benjamin and told him about the media coverage and community reaction. He said we needed to go public with our side of the story before the narrative became set in stone. He'd arrange a press conference where I could present evidence of the forgery and frame it as being the victim of a conspiracy. The press conference was scheduled for the next afternoon. That night, Susan called with a major discovery. She'd obtained Derek's cell phone location data for the past 6 weeks through legal channels. The data showed Derek had been at my house on 3 occasions when neither Anna nor I had been home. Security camera footage from our doorbell camera showed Derek approaching our front door, but the camera had mysteriously stopped recording for 20-minute windows during each visit. Susan believed Derek had disabled the camera, entered our house using some method, and planted evidence or poison. Benjamin immediately filed for a restraining order against Derek and requested police search Derek's home for evidence of arsenic or other poisons. Detective Foster was resistant, saying Derek was a witness, not a suspect, but Benjamin provided enough evidence of Derek's suspicious activity that Foster agreed to interview Derek again with more scrutiny. The press conference drew significant media attention. I stood at a podium with Benjamin beside me and explained calmly that I was innocent, that the insurance policy was a forgery, that evidence suggested I was being framed. I showed documents proving the forged signature and presented Derek's financial problems and search history. Several reporters asked aggressive questions about whether I was trying to deflect blame. Benjamin fielded those questions professionally and promised more evidence would emerge as the investigation continued. Lauren's attorney, Victor Russo, held his own press conference an hour later, claiming I was mounting a desperate defense and trying to blame an innocent man for my own crimes. Russo said Lauren was hospitalized and traumatized, that she'd bravely spoken truth about her brother's attempt to murder her, and that justice would be served. Russo's performance was polished and emotional, designed to play to sympathy for Lauren while painting me as a calculated killer. The media coverage was split. Some outlets focused on my evidence of forgery. Others focused on Lauren's dramatic collapse and accusation. Public opinion remained divided. That evening, Foster called Benjamin and said they'd searched Derek's apartment and car. They found no arsenic or poisons, but they did find documents related to Dad's real estate company, including financial projections and asset valuations. Derek had been studying the company's worth in detail. They also found text messages between Derek and Lauren discussing the will and expressing frustration about me receiving the company. One text from Lauren to Derek read, "He doesn't deserve it. Dad made a mistake and we need to fix it." Derek's response, "We will. Trust me." The text didn't prove a poisoning conspiracy, but they established motive and coordination between Lauren and Derek. Foster said he was expanding the investigation to include both of them as potential suspects. Benjamin filed a motion to compel Lauren to provide her medical records from before Dad's death. If Lauren had been truly poisoned by me over 3 weeks, there should be medical visits, or at least searches for symptoms. The medical records arrived 3 days later and showed Lauren had not visited any doctor during the 3 weeks she claimed to be suffering from poison symptoms. But there were pharmacy records showing she'd filled prescriptions for anti-nausea medication and supplements. The prescriptions had been called in by a doctor Lauren claimed was treating her remotely for stress-related illness. Benjamin tracked down the doctor who said she'd never prescribed anything for Lauren, and her medical license number had been stolen months ago. Someone had been using a forged identity to obtain medications that could mask or mimic poisoning symptoms. Susan Okonkwo made another crucial discovery. She'd been investigating Victor Russo's financial situation and found he'd been receiving regular payments from an offshore account for the past 8 months. The payments totaled over $200,000 and appeared to be connected to a shell company registered in the Cayman Islands. Susan traced the shell company ownership through multiple layers and discovered it was ultimately controlled by someone named Richard Novak. I'd never heard of Richard Novak. Susan sent me his photo and I recognized him immediately. Richard Novak was the business partner Dad had bought out of the real estate company 5 years ago. The buyout had been acrimonious. Novak felt he'd been forced out and undervalued. He'd threatened to sue, but eventually settled. I'd forgotten about him because he'd moved to California and we'd had no contact since. Benjamin immediately understood the implications. Novak had a grudge against Dad and potentially against me as Dad's successor in the company. If Novak could eliminate me through false murder charges, the company would become vulnerable. Lauren would inherit full control in my absence, and Lauren was financially desperate and easily manipulated. Novak could then approach Lauren with an offer to buy the company or become partners. It was a long-term plan to reclaim what Novak believed should have been his. Susan found evidence that Novak had been in contact with Russo for over a year, long before Dad's cancer diagnosis. They'd been discussing strategies to challenge Dad's will and create chaos in the company succession. When Dad got sick and changed his will to give me the company, Novak and Russo had accelerated their plans. They'd recruited Derek and Lauren by exploiting Lauren's resentment and Derek's financial desperation. The poisoning scheme had been Russo's idea. Lauren would poison herself with small amounts of arsenic, enough to create symptoms, but not enough to cause serious damage. She'd document the symptoms publicly. Then at the funeral, the most emotionally charged moment, she'd make the accusation in front of maximum witnesses. With me facing attempted murder charges, Lauren would gain control of the company through Dad's will succession provisions. Novak would then negotiate to buy the company or establish himself as Lauren's business partner, effectively stealing back the company Dad had built. Benjamin presented all this evidence to Detective Foster, who finally took the conspiracy seriously. Foster obtained warrants to search Russo's office, Novak's properties, and to examine all their communications and financial records. The searches yielded devastating evidence. Russo's office contained drafts of the forged insurance policy and correspondence with the disappeared broker who'd helped create it. There were also detailed plans for manipulating Lauren's medical symptoms, timing the funeral accusation, and handling media coverage to ensure public opinion turned against me. Novak's laptop contained emails discussing every stage of the conspiracy. One email from Novak to Russo read, "We need to destroy the brother completely. Criminal charges, social ruin, financial devastation. Only then will Lauren be desperate enough to sell us the company at bargain price." Another email discussed dosing amounts for arsenic to create symptoms without permanent damage. They'd been calculating how to hurt Lauren just enough to make the poisoning credible without actually killing her. Derek had been their inside operative. Text messages showed Russo had paid Derek $15,000 up front with promises of more money once the plan succeeded. Derek had obtained arsenic through a contact in the underground pharmaceutical market. He'd been adding small amounts to food and drinks Lauren consumed, timing the doses to create a pattern of symptoms that Lauren would then document online. The cruel irony was that Lauren thought she was participating in a plan to frame me for fake poisoning. She believed she was just acting sick for sympathy, while Derek helped her create a narrative. She didn't know Derek was actually poisoning her with real arsenic. Russo and Novak had kept that detail from her because they needed her symptoms and medical results to be genuine. If doctors had found no actual poison in her system, the entire accusation would fall apart. So they'd sacrificed Lauren's health for their scheme. When confronted with this evidence, Lauren broke completely. She admitted to her role in the conspiracy, but insisted she'd never known she was being genuinely poisoned. She'd thought the symptoms were psychosomatic or caused by stress. She'd agreed to the funeral accusation because Russo convinced her it was the only way to contest Dad's will and get the company she deserved. Russo had promised her that I'd never actually be convicted, just charged enough to create leverage for negotiating the estate. Lauren had believed the plan was a sophisticated legal maneuver, not attempted murder and fraud. Derek confessed next, trying to minimize his role. He claimed Russo and Novak had threatened him, said he'd had no choice because of his debts. But the text messages showed Derek had been enthusiastic about the plan and had volunteered to handle the arsenic administration. He'd seen it as easy money and a chance to secure his financial future through Lauren's inheritance. Victor Russo was arrested at his office and charged with conspiracy to commit fraud, evidence tampering, practicing law unethically, and conspiracy to commit aggravated assault through the arsenic poisoning. He tried to negotiate by offering testimony against Novak, but prosecutors had enough evidence from the emails and financial records. Russo's law license was suspended, and he faced disbarment proceedings in addition to criminal charges. Richard Novak was arrested at his home in California and extradited back to our state. He was charged with conspiracy to commit fraud, conspiracy to commit assault, attempted theft of business assets, and witness tampering. The evidence against him was overwhelming. His own emails had documented the entire conspiracy in detail, showing his orchestration of every stage. The criminal trials took 14 months. I attended every day of Russo's trial, and most of Novak's. Lauren testified at both trials, describing how she'd been manipulated and how she genuinely believed I was the enemy, while Russo was her advocate. Her testimony was devastating to Russo's defense. She described how he'd exploited her grief about Dad's death and her resentment about the will, how he'd made the conspiracy seem like justified retaliation rather than criminal fraud. The jury convicted Russo on all counts. He received 8 years in prison and was disbarred permanently. Novak's trial revealed even more disturbing details. Prosecutors presented evidence that Novak had been planning to destroy Dad's company for years, that the conspiracy against me was just one part of a larger scheme to bankrupt the business and buy its assets cheaply. Novak had been manipulating property values, spreading false information about the company's financial health, and trying to poach clients. The poisoning conspiracy was his most elaborate attack, but not his only one. Novak was convicted on all counts and sentenced to 12 years in prison. Derek pleaded guilty to conspiracy charges in exchange for testifying against Russo and Novak. He received 5 years in prison and was ordered to pay restitution for Lauren's medical costs from the arsenic poisoning. Lauren faced consequences too. While prosecutors acknowledged she'd been manipulated and genuinely poisoned, she'd still participated in a conspiracy to frame me for attempted murder. She'd made false accusations knowing they were false. She pleaded guilty to filing a false police report, fraud related to the insurance policy, and conspiracy to defame. She received 3 years probation, was ordered to pay my legal fees totaling $180,000, and was required to make a public statement admitting the accusations against me were false and apologizing for the harm caused. The public statement was broadcast on local news and posted online. Lauren looked broken as she read from a prepared script, admitting her role in the conspiracy and asking for forgiveness she knew she didn't deserve. The statement helped restore my reputation, but couldn't undo the trauma of being publicly accused of poisoning my sister at our father's funeral. The school where I taught welcomed me back with an apology from the principal. Parents who'd shunned us apologized to Anna. Our kids' bullying stopped, and counselors helped them process what had happened. But the damage to our family was permanent. Lauren and I would never have a relationship again. The real estate company thrived under professional management I hired. The scandal had actually increased the company's profile, and several clients reached out specifically because they'd followed the case and respected how I'd handled the false accusations. Within 2 years, the company's value increased 40%, and I was able to expand into new markets. Dad would have been proud of what I'd built from his legacy. Anna and I worked through the trauma with a therapist who specialized in families affected by false accusations and conspiracy. The therapist said what we'd experienced was a particularly cruel form of betrayal because it had weaponized grief over Dad's death and turned a funeral into a crime scene. The healing would take years, but we were committed to processing it together. I donated a portion of the company's profits to organizations that helped people wrongly accused of crimes and that provided legal assistance to those who couldn't afford quality representation. Benjamin Cross became a close friend, and I referred several business contacts to his practice. Susan Okonkwo's investigative work had been brilliant, and I recommended her to other clients who needed thorough, ethical investigation services. The key evidence that had ultimately unraveled the conspiracy came from an unexpected source. During the investigation, Susan had obtained access to Lauren's meal delivery app history as part of her digital forensics work. The data showed that in the 3 weeks Lauren claimed to be suffering from poison symptoms, she'd been ordering meals to be delivered to Derek's apartment, not her own address. The timestamps on the deliveries corresponded exactly with the times Lauren claimed to be too sick to eat. The meal orders included specific items that would have masked or minimized the effects of arsenic poisoning, high-fiber foods and supplements known to reduce toxin absorption. This proved Lauren had been coordinating with Derek more extensively than she'd admitted, and that she'd had knowledge about managing poison symptoms, contradicting her claim that she believed the symptoms were merely psychosomatic. The meal delivery history also showed orders placed to my address on the 3 occasions Derek had been at our house when we weren't home. Derek had ordered food to be delivered to our address as cover for his presence there. Delivery drivers confirmed seeing Derek answer our door and accept packages. This established Derek's unauthorized access to our home and his opportunity to plant evidence or gather information about our routines. The app history had been the digital evidence that transformed the case from circumstantial conspiracy to documented, time-stamped proof of coordination and planning. It showed premeditation and sophisticated coordination between Lauren and Derek. Prosecutors used the delivery data as cornerstone evidence in all 3 criminal trials. 3 years after Dad's funeral, I visited his grave alone. I told him about the company's success, about how I'd protected his legacy from those who'd tried to destroy it. I told him Lauren had been manipulated, but had also made choices that cost her everything. I told him I'd forgiven her for being weak, but couldn't rebuild trust that had been shattered so completely. I told him I missed him and wished he'd been there to see me prove everyone wrong about whether a math teacher could run a real estate company. I told him the conspiracy had nearly destroyed me, but ultimately made me stronger and more capable than I'd been before. I told him I'd made him proud. Standing at his grave, I understood that betrayal doesn't always come from enemies. Sometimes it comes from family members who convince themselves that resentment justifies destruction, that jealousy excuses conspiracy. Lauren had poisoned herself for money and revenge, had destroyed her own health to frame me for attempted murder, had weaponized our father's funeral as the stage for her accusation. The meal delivery app history had exposed the conspiracy's timeline and coordination, but it had also revealed something darker. Lauren had been ordering food designed to help her survive the poisoning while appearing sick enough to make accusations credible. She'd been calculating her own suffering, measuring it against potential profit. That kind of cold manipulation of your own body, that willingness to harm yourself to harm someone else, revealed a moral emptiness I could never comprehend or forgive. Justice had been served in court. Russo, Novak, and Derek were in prison. Lauren was ruined financially and socially. I had the company and my reputation restored, but the cost had been the destruction of any possibility of family reconciliation. Some betrayals are too fundamental to repair. She'd tried to destroy my life at our father's funeral, and the digital trail of her meal deliveries had revealed a conspiracy that went far deeper than simple sibling rivalry, exposing a calculated, coordinated effort to steal everything my father had built. That was enough. The truth had won, even though trust could never be restored. If you enjoyed this, you'll definitely want to see the next ones too. So subscribe now and let me know your take in the comments.